90% of the time they've already been doing something with OpenAI, and now they want to own their own model, right? Because in today's day and age, that model is an asset, right? That is
Yeah.
an asset. They used to say data is the new gold, right? That's what they used to say. Data is the new gold. Everything about data is gold. Well, if the LLM is an extension of your data, why would you not want to own it? You would never give away your data, just like you'd never give away your LLM.
You're listening to the Sandhill Markets podcast. I'm your host and Sandhill Markets CEO, Adam Hardy. Here at Sandhill, we focus on providing education, community, and access to venture. With this podcast, you'll get a seat at the table for discussions with other founders, investors, and innovators. I'm excited to learn a lot from these discussions, and I hope you are too. I'd love to get the kind of background on you and what you're, this is where the conversation will go, so we'll go deeper into what you're actually building, but kind of background stuff and how you got here.
Yeah, perfect. Been in tech for 20 plus years now. Took electronic engineering in school, jumped right into my career as a networking engineer after school. Focused a lot on networking switches and business phone systems, right? Kind of old school networking engineer, and did that for a long time, and then pivoted to cloud about 10 years ago. A little bit later on in the cloud boom, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it was the best thing I ever did, right? I mean, I got out of my, kind of traditional hardware engineer position into cloud, kind of a career pivot, in my early 30s, right? So it was a bit unique. And I jumped at that and went all in on the cloud and AWS specifically. I went to work for a company called Onica, which was like an AWS consultancy based out of Santa Monica as a solutions architect, right? Focusing heavily on helping enterprises build solutions in AWS. This is where I made the pivot to AI ML. Built and ran their data science practice within, and then we were doing big projects for big companies, building AI ML solutions in AWS and doing it very well. So we were making a lot of money, a lot of revenue. Onica was doing 80 million in revenue. Got acquired by Rackspace for just under 400 million. And I went to Rackspace, and I worked at Rackspace, leading their data science and data engineering practice globally for a while, and through that got turned on to Hugging Face and had them on. I actually had a podcast at the time myself. It was called AI and You, and had Hugging Face on my podcast. And through that, just got kind of fascinated with what they were doing, what they were building. And this was pre ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I got to know Clem a little bit, the CEO and co-founder over there, and they made me an offer to join them on what we called the revenue team, the monetization team, right? Figuring out ways how to kind of make money off that open source world. And I jumped over there as one of the earlier hires, just after they got their B, and was with them until they got their C round. So yeah, learned a lot, saw a ton. Just decided that I wanted to jump into a more earlier stage, a little bit earlier stage than that too. So I jumped over to a company called Roboflow, which was a Series A company in the CV space, and led their customer engineering as well as partnerships. And through really Hugging Face and Roboflow, it gave me the lessons to really start my own thing and go after it with Arcee, which I kicked off last February.
Damn, quite the journey.
It's been a journey, yeah.
Well, so I guess maybe I'll hold. I'll let John go. He's here too. We have to let him talk. No, it's good. But we'll let John go, and then I have a bunch of questions to follow up with.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I would say my background is fewer startups. None of them really got super funded, and none of them were really ML heavy as their core mission. But I graduated from Duke in 2017. I was focusing on the Israel-Palestine conflict and kind of how to model multi-state scenarios with all the different settlements. And the question was always like, what software do we use to even come up with hypotheticals? And so in college, I kind of transitioned from poli-sci to geospatial modeling and then forward-looking analytics for the individual settlements. And so with that, I got interested in geospatial. I was, briefly, I did an internship at the Carlyle Group, realized that wasn't, the world I wanted to be in. I wanted a little bit closer to kind of real life assets. and I was doing a little too much Excel, which I was not good at. Tough combination. And then I ended up working at a startup here in Washington, D.C. that ended up moving down to Miami. And I was running their predictive analytics and geospatial modeling division. And so that's where I got like very interested in kind of how do these programs actually get built, right? Like how do the models get built? So I was sourcing data, spending a lot of time kind of, this is when unstructured data, you just like get a CSV off the internet, toss it into open, like into any one of the potential models you're using, like AutoML, and you're like, am I getting signal? Like, is this working? And so that's kind of how I got interested in the space. I ended up then kind of transitioning into trying to learn about my finances. How do I like manage my own money? And then I was like, well, maybe I can make some money angel investing. And I realized I didn't know a ton. Like, I really
the beginning of the end. The beginning of the end.
Yeah, it was tough. And so I realized I got to be an expert in a space. And so I just spent about a year and a half reading literature on and off, and speaking to folks about, one, how I could help them, or two, what is there in the ML space that I should be paying attention to. That started to lead me to a specialist role at a Series A focused fund, where I, currently spend my time doing diligences for ML companies. But I ended up making an investment in Arcee on a couple of different theses, but one of the core ones was team, and the second one was team, and the third one was the team. I mean, that's really it, right? I mean, but it's the technical chops, but it was the team's ability to have those good conversations.
Cool. Well, now that we got that out of the way, we'll talk more about that, because I do have questions for you too, John. But Marc, I'd love to continue the story a little bit, where so you obviously had been active and been like around this space for a while, and then kind of, it's interesting because I think that there's different founders have different experiences of like, oh, I've always wanted to do this, so I could never, there's like I could never work for one kind of, or never work for somebody archetype that gets like kind of put on a pedestal. And then there's also the thing that maybe less sexy and not as like relevant to the new grad founders, but is a great way to build like real value, is you were involved in the space for a long time, and then ultimately kind of moved earlier and earlier, and then made the jump. What was you mentioned it, you tell the story kind of like, moving earlier and earlier, or was there like an inflection point, or was it always the plan, or like how did I guess you were clearly kind of focused on this space for a while, so that part I think is easily answered, but then what was the like, okay, now it's time to go for it?
Yeah, it would have been, Roboflow, right? When I was at Roboflow, it was really, after Hugging Face, I had learned so much being at Hugging Face and seeing what they were able to do with that community, with everything they have, the momentum.
What year is that? Give me a timeline.
That's 2019, yeah, or 2020 potentially.
Cool.
But it was, I mean, like I said, it was pre Chat GPT, right? It was pre
this moment that pre like paradigm shift.
Yeah. And Hugging, I remember going to I went to the AI summit that year in New York, and we had a booth, Hugging Face and Intel, and no one even knew who Hugging Face was, like nobody, and at an AI summit. And now look, I mean, it'd be hard pressed to find someone who didn't know what Hugging Face is. So I mean, that point really taught me so much on kind of what a startup can actually become, right? And watching what Clem and Julian and Tom were able to build there was fascinating, and especially because it was really built on the backs of open source in the community, right? And I had been product oriented for so long that seeing essentially a company that didn't really have a product and was more focused on the community and open source and all that, be as successful as they were, it was really just it was a great lesson to kind of watch unfold. And then just watching how big they were getting and how fast they were getting that big, and then going to Roboflow and saying, okay, now they actually had a product, like a true product. They didn't have the open source platform, and watching how you build a product up right from nothing into something, into users and features, and it was really at that point early on at Roboflow was really like, okay, I learned so much at at Hugging Face. Like I need to use what I learned, not kind of let it waste away in my own head. And I need to bring it to market because it was really wrapped around bringing LLMs into the enterprise, right? Which was a huge need. And it was saying, a lot of companies are playing with large language models. They have them in dev. They're doing fun things with them. Very little of them have them in production. So it's like, how can I set out to build something that will enable these companies to use it in production and get the true ROI? And yeah, we had a lot of plans. So I said, okay, we got to go. We got to do this, right? So it wasn't always the case. I'll say, a last point is, you're right. I mean, it's really a lot of people say, that founders are young tech founders. They'd never work for someone really, or maybe they'd work for someone briefly. But yeah, I'm the complete opposite, right? But I'd say that the years of experience are under like that's a big asset, right? I mean, you could have say two young tech founders that are in their mid 20s that are very smart engineers, but without having to live the experience of working with companies, working in the enterprise, selling something. It's very hard to get over the hump, right? It's very hard to take your company to the next level when it
Yeah.
comes to that stuff, because making money counts, right? Getting product market fit matters, right? So yeah.
No, it's super interesting, and I think that at the enterprise, and I think maybe this is I have a question for John, but then in the enterprise game, I look at I've invested in a lot of YC companies. Like it's part of where I did some of my first investing through these stonks access funds they were obviously like they index towards the really young founder, but they also index towards B2B SaaS. And I look at some of these founders sometimes like, how are you going to sell into? Do you know like what that process looks like, right? Like how does that even? I cannot picture you on that call, right? Like having that conversation, and then it's a more extreme version. We had a conversation with one of the early biz dev hires at Anduril, and one of their kind of similar setup, right? Where it was a member of the team and like an early investor, and he was talking about the defense procurement process, and like there's all this stuff happening on Twitter, like everyone's like into defense now, and it's like, do you all know what actually getting the government to buy something from you is like? Like it's a whole nother game.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
whole other skill set. It's got nothing to do with what you're building, right? And I think that the same thing applies on the enterprise level, where it's like a skill set kind of in and of itself. But yeah, no, it's super interesting, and it's definitely super valuable in this current moment. John, you obviously have been focused on AI ML stuff for a while now, as you mentioned, and like kind of pushed to specialize, and seems to be a good choice in the current market. Good for you.
It was a good choice. It was a good choice.
What made kind of obviously Marc's kind of experience in this space, but what was, and outside of the team comment, but maybe going a little deeper, what stood out when you were how did you all first get connected, and what were like those early kind of conversations like, and what made you go like, okay, this is different? Because there's a lot of AI also. There's tons of hype around. I'm sure Marc, and I'm sure you see a lot too, where you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, there was this. So like Roboflow is an extremely like one of my favorite companies out there, right? And Joseph Nelson, the founder, is also like one of the people I respect most in like the AI, ML, and CV industries, right? So to see one of the founding engineers decide to go and start a company, I thought to myself, this guy is leaving a fantastic place for only the best potential opportunity, right? Like he's got to have a very good reason to not be at Roboflow. And he's founding a company which is like, it's just one, the equity boost is huge from starting your own versus working at someone else's, but it's also like, who's he doing this with and what is he doing and why? So I got connected to Jacob, the CTO at Arcee, and we chatted, and I said, hey man, like I would love to like just learn more about what your go-to-market is going to be like. And so I ended up chatting with Brian at Arcee as well, who's also one of the other co-founders. And Brian was chatting with me about kind of their vision for how to bring their products to market. And I said, okay, this is like, I've had 2 back-to-back fantastic conversations when I didn't really think I was going to be here for like any investment reason. I just, I was curious as to what Jacob was up to. And so then I got introduced to Marc, and at that point I had met with 2 of the 3, core team members. And right on the first call, I was like, Marc, like, what do you, like, I met with 2 of the other team members. It was fantastic. Like, I would love to participate in any way possible. And that's how it came together very quickly, and it just made sense because I met the team naturally.
And Mark, I think that's not a very typical investor relation or investor. I don't know. How does that compare to your other, especially in AI? Because give me a date on, and let's do another timeline check. When is this all happening?
5 months ago.
5 months ago. So we're in the the post Chat GPT moment. Mark, you
Yeah.
had just left a notable company, and you clearly were you inundated with interest? Like what was it like from the found, because I'm you look at the hype cycle from outside and it's like, oh my God, like everyone wants AI so bad, and you're here like, oh, I've actually been doing this for a while. So what was your call? Was the experience with John typical? Was those, or what was the spread of your experience with investors in those early days when you were first? Was that the first round 5 months ago? Was the first outside money in?
Yeah, September was our seed, first round.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, no, that was, I mean, with John, it wasn't typical. It wasn't that typical. Actually, we had a good grind to raise.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good grind. It was a good grind to get out there and raise some money. We're not your typical founding team, I guess, right? We're not, two ex Meta engineers, researchers, right? So it was a bit of a challenge. So, but we're unique in that, what we've done to date, I think speaks, that uniqueness speaks volumes in that, right? And it's, you have Brian, one of my co-founders, who was the ex head of sales at Hugging Face, right? So pure sales, go to market, revenue. Then Jacob, who is my other co-founder, he's the CTO. He was the founding engineer at Roboflow, head of ML, right? Strictly technical, and I sit in the middle, like both, right? Been on go to market roles, revenue roles, engineer for many years, right? And kind of, we all have the ability to understand what we're trying to do and kind of put a strategy to the path ahead. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't that easy, I guess. It wasn't, people didn't really buy into it that much, right? So yeah, it was a little challenging.
That's interesting. So well, I guess this is a good. We skipped this part. Let's get a high level on like what RC does and like where you sit in this market, who you sell to, like how you're making money, whatever, all the good stuff.
Yeah, so we build SLMs, which is smaller specialized language models, right? So we believe that for businesses, for 99% of business use cases, you can utilize a smaller specialized language model over a one model to rule them all type world, right? So if you have a model between seven, let's just say 7 billion parameters, that a lot of times is all you need, right? In a business world for a business use case, and you don't have to use GPT or Claude or Cohere for those giant general models, or even giant general models in the open source world, right? So, but in order to achieve that kind of level of capability from within the smaller model, you need to train it accordingly, right? So we have a multi-layered approach for our stack, which we train end to end, to so the model is fully capable. Domain adapted model is what we call it, right? So we do continual pre-training first and model merging, which is a very new and novel technique of fusing two models together. And then we do an alignment on that model after, which is really supervised fine tuning. And then we add it into a retrieval augmented generation system finally as the final layer. And it becomes a generator from within a RAG system. But the point is it's an end-to-end stack where we do, each layer allows the model to get smarter and smarter on your proprietary data, right? So our stack actually runs in your VPC, right? It's not a hosted SaaS. You don't send us your data. We come to you, we deploy the stack in your cloud, and you own the model, you own the stack, data never leaves. So that's really resonating from within the enterprise, right? So, we're heavily focused on AWS right now. A lot of very large companies sit in AWS, and they'll never want their data to leave their S3 back data lake, right? So coming into those companies, they're very excited to work with us and own their own model, right? Own their own stack and just take advantage of a fully functioning SLM.
Yeah, no, and it makes a lot of sense. So, and for me to regurgitate and to better understand, the SLM, the compared to the LLM is interesting in and of itself, and like it feels like there's that narrative of like the AGI pursuit of like, let's pour the money in, and then you're heading to the stance of like, you don't, and maybe you can give me some use cases where you don't actually need like general intelligence for whatever this, this thing that you're doing is, and then you're deploying directly into the enterprise. So give me a sense of like target customers, target use cases, and if you're willing to share like stuff around pricing, monetization, like how do you, because it's not a consultancy, right? It's not like, hey, we'll do this and we'll go away. But so give me a little bit of like who you, and you can give high level examples as much as you're willing to share. I think there's logos on the website, and then a specific use case maybe, and then some notes on monetization.
Yeah, so typically it's general Q&A, right? That is what the companies want, the enterprises want, right? It's some form of general Q&A for a use case that involves their private data, right? So, for example, we're working with Thomson Reuters right now on their general Q&A with their tax line of business, right? To ask tax questions. Guild is another one, which is a large education platform, which we're working with them to have them have their own domain adapted model for their teacher student interactions, right? General Q&A. And yeah, our monetization aspects are we sell a software, right? So although we run in your environment, it's a bit of a different pricing model, but yeah, we sell annual contracts because we're delivering value throughout, right? It's not literally, we don't just train you a model and walk away. We actually drop our software in, which is an end-to-end stack, which is providing continuous value, right? So you can think of after the initial training of the model, aligning of the model, adding it to a RAG layer, what do? Well, we do data drift, right? Monitoring data drift, monitoring model drift, right? Monitoring inference performance. All these things, all these ML ops features inform you on when you need to retrain your model and then retune your model and then keep, re-add data to your RAG system, right? So you could think of it as, the product itself as a managed service, essentially being, all wrapped into one. And I mean, Mistral is the model of the day to day, but 6 months from now, there'll probably be another model, right, in the open source. So, swapping models,
you keep
retraining it.
You keep them up to date. And so do you pitch, like, are you an alternative to them trying, like, is part of the pitch I can imagine, right, where are you going to do this? Like, you want to do this. It's time to do it. People want it. Consumer top down. We lived in this like post chat GPT moment where it's almost, maybe like the mobile paradigm, like you got to have, it's not a strategy, but it's not the strategy, but it is something that you do need to have to be like a modern business.
Yeah.
And are you making the argument and part of the sale of, well, you're not going to hire internally for this. Maybe you have some people for maintenance and stuff, but you're not going to get the talent or the expertise that we bring. Is it like an either or? Are you like working alongside AI teams as well? How does that play out?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time it's they're going to do it, and they just don't have the skill set or the capacity to do it themselves, right? So 90% of the time, they've already been doing something with OpenAI, and now they want to own their own model, right? Because in today's day and age, that model is an asset, right? That is an asset. They used to say data is the new gold, right? That's what they used to say. Data is the new gold. Everything about data is gold. Well, the LLM is an extension of your data. Why would you not want to own it? You would never give away your data, just like you'd never give away your LLM. So why would you hit on a closed source API, right? There's no ROI on that for you from a product perspective. So they want to own it. So they're like, okay, we've built something. We've used OpenAI. We've seen, it's been okay. Now we want our own model, right? So let's work with you and we'll train our own model so we can own it, right, as an asset. And these things, especially not just enterprise, like when you go to startups, this being an asset for a startup is very big as they go to fundraise. They go, we have this model. Like it's something that they can actually use, right?
It's got to be proprietary for it to be, accretive or whatever the right word is.
Yeah, exactly.
Was this always the pitch, John, or did it get better from when you guys first? This is pretty good. I'm buying it. I'm buying it on this side. So was it always this like perfect, or was there some ideation?
It was never a pitch because I didn't come in through the pitch route, like I didn't come in and meet the team in a way in which I was like, hey, you're raising money, like let's like do the dance. It was much more, hey, like what are you guys doing? I'm curious. And from there, like the pitch, I was like, oh, are you guys like building a RAG system? It's like, well, like not only a RAG system, but like we're also doing a handful of other things. I was like, okay, so like what else are you doing? And it's exactly what Marc just said, which is like, it's a whole suite of tools that individually are very difficult to actually work with. Like building your own RAG system in itself is extremely complicated, like an advanced RAG system. And so when I saw they were doing that in conjunction with like continual pre-training, and then they were also doing like model drift tracking and the idea of owning your own model, like all of that is like, you can even find companies today that are individual, like each one of those features is a company right now, right? Or like Llama Index, for example, is very, very heavy on different RAG architectures and community. So the pitch was never a pitch, but it became clear to me that this actually, shockingly, didn't exist, which is a model provider that's custom and accurate, affordable, and ownable. Like it just doesn't make sense that this doesn't exist. And when they were like, "Yeah, we do this," I was like, and your team is qualified to do this, I can tell. And they're like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay, let's." Like I'm in.
Yeah, it's gonna be big. I feel like we're hitting on a lot of stuff that is against what you hear a lot about or read a lot about in the AI space. Because I think a couple of, I mean, maybe it's just the stuff that I've been listening to recently. One storyline that, and I'd love to get your guys' take on, is the incumbent versus newcomer argument in AI, where I think that you actually sit in the AI is good for incumbents camp, because you're serving that, like the incumbent, like you have the data, you don't have the skill or the the talent to get it done, and we solve that problem, compared to there's a whole bunch of VC money pouring into new AI solutions that are trying to attack the maybe this paradigm shift opens up the opportunity for new $10 billion, $100 billion standalone platforms. And interested to hear it from the founder side and from the investor side. Marc, how do you think about this AI moment as is it good for startups? Is it good for incumbents? And whatever we talk about the open source stuff, maybe that's a separate question. But how do you see the AI moment? Obviously, opportunity for your specific thing, but I actually think that you sit in this weird in between, right, where you're actually helping incumbents take advantage of it, and that's the opportunity that you have. Whereas, I don't know, do you think a lot of VC dollars are being wasted on seed stage startups? Maybe that's the pointed question.
Yeah, I guess I know it's a weird. Yeah, VC world's weird, right? It's weird that it's always about the first two, three companies that do something state of the art or novel, and then it's like, let's see if that can be a $10 billion business, right? But I mean, for us, it's like that. It's you know LLMs in themselves, it barely scratched the surface, right? Like enterprises have not started getting LLMs into production. When they do, that the sky's the limit, really, right? So there's no need. It's almost like saying you don't need to keep pivoting and trying to find new areas. The old areas aren't even, they're not old, and they're not ready yet, right? So you can play in that space, and I mean, it's it's a strange time, right? With all that VC money going into even certain companies. I won't say by name, but certain companies are doing things that even I'm unsure what it is, which is I know pretty much everything in this space. So when I hear things, I'm like, I don't really even know what that means, or maybe they're just
A
describing
mix of
something.
acronyms that
Yeah,
don't make
it's
sense.
like
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. I think that's okay. If it doesn't make sense to you, I think that maybe we should look into it. Maybe we
yeah,
should
it's
look
like
into the bottom of if they're making things up or not.
yeah. So I mean, but hey, it happens. It happens. People throw a lot of money at these companies when they come out, and I laugh a bit because we did struggle, right? We did struggle. We did struggle to fundraise on a solid business plan with a great idea. And I mean, looking back on it now, I mean, we have a bit of a chip on our shoulder, right? We just passed, $1 million in revenue we started selling in November. So, essentially everyone, many people in the VC world said, no, you're not gonna be able to do this. And then we're proving them wrong. So.
Yeah. So John, I think you have I know obviously I think clearly your opinions about this, because you were bullish and supportive of Marc in the early kind of days of it. But how do you weigh in on the incumbent versus newcomer in the AI space kind of moment from an investment and who's going to gain, who's going to hold the value over the long term. And then what, and the follow-up question too, of when you were, working with / getting to know Marc and his team, why, like almost like steelman it a little bit of like, what do you think the other side, like what would be the version of you that was like, oh, like the VC that passed, like can you talk a little bit about what you think that they were thinking?
I think the VC that passes is probably one that doesn't understand a lot of the complexity of what the team was talking about accomplishing, which is like on its surface, this looks like another company that is like building LLMs. But the reality is like how like my conversations that got onto the more technical side of things, I realized that things they were trying to accomplish were not only state of the art, but they were extremely difficult to accomplish. And the fact that they were going to be not only being a model provider, but doing it in a state of the art manner. So like, we touched on RAG, but a lot of it is kind of like, I'll bring up a paper that I had recently, like a dual retrieval RAG solution, right? That didn't really exist.
I'm embarrassed to ask this far into it, and I thought maybe I'd get away with it. Tell me what RAG is.
RAG, I mean, I would say like, I want to answer this one as the investor to see, what I really know. But no, I think RAG is a way of reducing hallucinations for LLMs, because you're selectively kind of calling a standalone vector database of information that you're supplementing your core LLM with. And you can use your RAG solution in multiple ways, but it's a way to validate a fact that comes in from the LLM and kind of check it against that. Would you agree with that statement, Marc?
Did you pass the quiz, Marc? Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, just in its simplest form, I would say you maybe overcomplicated a bit. Like at its simplest form, RAG is just retrieval augmented generation. So when you hit an LM, you ask it a question, it hits the LM. In this world, you ask an LM question, it actually goes into your knowledge base and it looks up that question first. It retrieves relevant information, then it sends that with the question. So the model's getting an informed question and getting an informed answer, right? So all it's doing is doing a lookup into your data first.
Got it. So yeah, it's contextualizing the question that you're asking within the database that you provided with.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a specialist now too, John.
Yeah, John said it. John said it a lot. He complicated it. Actually, it was good.
That's good. He's trying to impress you. He's trying to impress you, Marc.
I'm on TV. What can I say? No,
Exactly.
Adam, well, one of the things I just want to say is like when I have a conversation with the company, I frequently don't understand how to actually accomplish what I'm talking about, but I understand who's been weighing in on it and why they believe it's important. So for example, like a dual retrieval RAG solution is like a somewhat novel concept a couple of months ago. Not many people were talking about it and or using it. And it's also like a somewhat niche thing, right? Like you don't build a company around a dual retrieval RAG. It's just a version of RAG for a specific situation. But at that moment, the paper had only been out for sub 1 month. And so when I brought it up with the team, I was like, hey, like, have you looked at this? There was like, yes, we've looked at this and 4 other options that you haven't even brought up. And that's when I was like, these guys are smarter than, and that's all I really need to know.
Yeah.
Is like when I have that conversation with someone else, frequently they go, I've heard of it. But when someone sends me 4 links to different things that are much more advanced, and like we're actively thinking about things in XYZ area, it's just a signal to me that it's like, okay, they are beyond a place that I know, and that is probably a good place to be.
And I think maybe an interesting follow-up question on either side of the table also is, because what you're actually kind of describing, John, is that when you contextualize that within the other conversation with founders that maybe you have, where not everyone is as deep in AI as just because you work at an AI company or you have an AI startup doesn't mean that you've been like living and breathing it for a long time, because it is like this new thing. And I feel like that's I don't know, maybe kind of an ugly thing to think about, some of the AI founders and maybe the crypto have like a version of this, right? Where it's like when there's a lot of hype, it's like, this is just the thing that people are building right now. So like, I'm in, like, let's try something. You can raise some money on it. And Marc, it sounds like you've maybe had a similar, was when you think about the fundraise, and John described it as like, maybe people just didn't really get it. Is that how you think? Is that like how you think about it, or is that like the feeling that you got, where people just didn't really understand even what you were getting at? And now the proof is in the pudding a little bit from from the traction perspective. Um, but is that, when you look back on it, what made it hard?
Yeah, I think one piece was, yeah, not getting it. I think that was one big piece, which also leads into, if you're not understanding what we're pitching you, then, but it's kind of a weird, I don't know. I look on the other side of it too. Are any of them understanding? Like, did any VC understand what Sakana AI pitched them when they pitched them a swarm of LLM? Probably not. Like, I mean, so I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if any. I don't know. I don't know. You could say yes, but then I see other companies getting big money that are building really complicated, deep tech products. So maybe not. I don't know if I'll ever be able to answer exactly why. I mean, I'd love to get say 10 VCs that said no to me to give me a true answer on why they said no. That'd be good. I think they probably just didn't think we had the capability to build a business that could make money, or a product that makes money. That if that was it, I guess it's all about the team, right, John? Like John bet on us as a team. I guess no one, there's a lot of people that didn't believe in us.
From a business model perspective, it seems relatively straightforward. What is it like? I'm not, the smartest AI guy around by any means, but if you came and were like, well, the enterprise need to own their data, so we're going to build them full stack solution internally. It's sticky because we're the ones who built it. It's long term because it's going to be like a part of their product, push to production, like all that stuff. Like, what was and John or Marc, depending, like, what was the push back on monetization?
I get a lot of the message I heard was, you'll have to handhold the enterprises too much. That was a big piece.
And
Yep.
that's not true?
I mean, you do a little bit, but it's also worth it. Like, it's not
Yeah.
like you're not, your margins aren't getting crushed. Like, you're not a services business, right? And I mean, I'll argue Mosaic held more than anybody on their way to a $1.2 billion acquisition. So,
Yeah.
I mean, they were probably 90% a services company when they got acquired. So, you kind of have to in this space. So, I mean, it's just kind of, when you're dealing with large companies, you want to become
And the
a
contract's big
trusted.
enough, it's
Yeah,
not self-serve software, right? Like
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And our ACVs aren't 10K, right? So,
Yeah.
these are six-figure contracts that's what they get, right? They get some white glove
They
support.
get a human, it's worthwhile. Like, so maybe that's a good segue into a little bit of the more enterprisey stuff, right? Of like, you've been on the technical, you have the founding team was this really nice mix of, right, like enterprise sale, you're in between, and then like more technical. Or I guess, what's the team looking like now? What are you leaning into? Like, what is sales cycle? Like, give me some like, this is where we're at, and this is what we think, next 6 months. I think it's interesting from like, what does headcount look like? What is organizationally? What does it look like?
So we're at 12 now, heavy on the engineering side, right? So, out of the 12, 10 are engineers. Six of them are applied NLP researchers. Like, we're heavily focused on, the state of the art research. Not only, staying, recent, up to date with the latest trends in research and reading papers, but also, because model merging is such an important piece to us, and we are, the pioneers of it. We're actually creating research as well. We're not just following research, we're creating. So we definitely have a large research angle to what we're doing, and then we have product engineers. And yeah, I mean, the future is, we're going to scale up that research team to be, even more of a world class research team, and we're going to continually add more engineers to the product side of the house. And yeah, we're just going to keep building up and building up the talent. It's obviously, in today's day and age in LLMs, this is kind of a hard market to capture those specialized NLP engineers or research
Yeah.
engineers. We've been lucky. Like, we have, engineers from, Meta, ex Meta engineers, ex Microsoft, ex DeepMind, right? So, we we tell a good story, and it really resonates. So it really helps that what we're building is actually a product with traction and not just an idea as well.
And what's interesting on the, I recently made this point on, some of the, and we don't want to talk about it because it's kind of over talked about, but the drama of like the Elon OpenAI aspect of all this, and like, and how, a lot of people are talking about the open source versus closed source or whatever. And I think, and, from the valuation perspective, but actually I think the most important point of it is how the talent ends up feeling about it. Like, because it's so specialized, if the talent ends up feeling a certain way about how it's supposed to be, whether that's right or wrong, it's just more of an emotional, like, screw him because he's not being good about it, or it should be this way, that's the biggest risk to an OpenAI or an Elon or whoever, is that like if the talent ends up being like, this is wrong, it shouldn't be like this, it should be this other way. And it sounds like for you, is it a selling point to be able to work with the enterprise data? If I'm like an NLP engineer,
Yeah, absolutely.
like these are the biggest, like I need the data to deliver the value. My research doesn't mean anything if I don't get if I don't get this, but I also don't want to work, no offense to them, but at Thomson Reuters, right? Like I want to work with the best in the business and I want to work with their data. And is that how kind of where the pitch ends up going?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much associated with what we can offer from a perspective of the role, right? So the role allows you to work heavily with the enterprise, work heavily with enterprise level data, private data, and build kind of state of the art things, right? In one of the fastest growing areas of tech of all time, right? So it's a great space to be in, and it's a great place to play as an engineer. And you know when you say, oh, you get to work with these enterprises, you get to influence and impact them. That's a frontier that hasn't been crossed yet. Like these enterprises have not figured it out, right? A lot of them are have no idea what's going on in the space. They don't know how they're going to get into fraud. So you know feeling like you're a part of that is really a great feeling when it comes to how long you've been in the space and you want to do that, right?
Yeah. John, because you work with a number of AI companies and obviously have invested in a number of them as well. How do you think about, like Mark's talking a little bit about this recruiting process on the engineering side? Is that like a very common theme of like how, like, of what matters in the
Yeah.
seed stage?
I mean, the best engineers and researchers all have the pick of the litter. They can go to any one of the companies, right? Like they can go anywhere, right? And so the biggest thing, honestly, is people finding a lot of meaning in their specific company and the product that they're working on. So I think there are folks that don't want to. They're the research forever people, right? And like that's okay. They contribute in a huge way to the community, but they're never on the table for a seed stage company, right? And so you want someone who's also they want their product to actually make it to market. They don't want it to die on the shelf, right? They don't want to work at Google where they could make a huge amount of money and work with smart people, but their product may never see the light of day. And so Arcee has an interesting intersection in which there is a large research component, like Marc is saying, but that research is actively utilized by the other half of the engineering team to go deploy it the next day with a new client. And so, like, being able to have half research and then have your research deployed by the other half, I don't see that very frequently. And that's why Arcee has, like, I mean, Marc, I don't know if you want to touch on this, but like you just picked up some fantastic folks in the last 2 or 3 months that, like, a seed stage startup, it's shocking to bring in the level of NLP talent that Arcee's brought in this early, and I think it's for this reason. But do you also think it's because you have both arms under one house?
Yeah, I mean, we have the open source presence as well, right? Which really helps, right? A lot of engineers like to give back and contribute to the community. We have the product, so it's the other side of it. Like a lot of engineers don't want to just build things for community. They want to build real products that have a real impact. So we have both sides of that, and yeah, I mean, having it all under one company and the the traction we have today from within organizations, enterprises, that really helps, right? And, a lot of engineers, surprisingly enough, a lot of engineers say, okay, well, how are you what's your revenue like? What's your product like, right? The questions that you're like, well, really? Oh, they want to know that. Okay. And then we get Brian on them, and he wows them on what he's selling. But,
Yeah.
it's funny to hear that when they think, yeah, and it's like, great, because they're thinking long term, right? They're thinking, what is this product going to be? What is it now? What is it going to be? And what is this company going to be? Is it going to be a company that actually has a sustainable product that can make money, or is it going to be, a research org only? And we're trying to play the best of both worlds here, and we've got a good handle on it so far.
And I know we're coming up on time, and as an ender, then as a segue from the last thing you just said, Marc, is where is Arcee headed? Like, what is the vision? As in, obviously there's specifics of this, and there's a lot of layers, I'm sure. But what's if you had to put a vision of the future in our mind here for Arcee and their place in this space, what would you say?
We're going after owning the category of SLMs, and we're going after owning model merging, right? That is absolutely, we want to be the pioneers of model merging, which is, an absolutely fantastic new technique that was really going to lighten the load when it comes to LLM training, which is obviously, a well-known fact that LLM training is heavy, it's inefficient, it's expensive, and model merging greatly reduces all those things. So we want to absolutely own the category of model merging and SLMs, and kind of like how Hugging Face owns the category of open source models, right? So it's a lot of work. It's gonna take a lot of execution, but we have a great start so far.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna look up. I'll provide an explanation of what model merging is on my own time. But I really appreciate it. I feel smarter. I'll bug you to invest a different time. I know John will too, and we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to the Sandhill Markets podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, make sure to click the link in the description to subscribe to our newsletter. You'll be kept up to date on venture news and our weekly live events where we host similar discussions with other amazing guests. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, where we post regularly about upcoming events. Once again, thank you for listening, and talk soon.